Usyk is not just a boxer, he is a symbol, a technician, a champion, a genius inside the matrix. But every empire has an ending. Every great fighter faces the same enemy. Not another southpaw, not another puncher, but Father Time. And this is why Usyk needs to retire before boxing takes back everything it gave him. So when it comes to the concept of retirement, there are multifarious perspectives on this matter. For example, there's the Usyk perspective, there's the boxing purist perspective, the team's perspective, and then there are the opponent's perspective, and the opponents is plural. This perhaps could be Usyk's perspective. Now, only Usyk knows. Only he knows what motivates him. He fights not only for himself, but in a sense for his country. Maybe he would be motivated for that Rico rematch because there may be an incentive for the rematch to be more decisive. Maybe, just maybe, he wants a final farewell fight at home or close to home. Maybe he wants another challenge to create that intensity. Here is a perspective. When you achieve lots of money, that factor, money, becomes less significant. And purpose, it drives human beings. Motivation is essential. It's essential for prosperity. So think of this. Boxing is a brutal business. If you have lost the intensity, then surely you should leave. But has Usyk lost the intensity? Maybe Usyk wants to stay at the top of the mountain. But you can't stay at the top of the mountain forever. And at the end of the day, we are all just mortal, capable of victory and capable of being defeated. Perhaps, just perhaps, Usyk wants to create another moment. Perhaps he wants to create more cultural impact. Regardless of the motivation, every time Usyk steps into the ring, every time he enters that ring, he is taking a huge risk. So let's transition and let's talk about the team's perspective. Again, this is just speculation, just an assumption. But when I think of someone's team, I mainly think of management and trainer. But of course, there are other elements: strength conditioning, sparring partners, co-trainers, in some instances, dietitians and other additions to the team. Every team has similarities, but some teams have differences. When it comes to managers and promoters, of course, money is important. It's a capitalist society. To deny its importance is ridiculous. And more fights, in a sense, equals more money. And the money here is substantial. The more you fight, the more not only you get paid, but the more the team gets paid. This can create like a weird dynamic. You may think your boxer should retire. When I say they, I mean the team. But what about the financial infrastructure that you've created? That's hard to say no to. And think of this, no matter how great a trainer you are, you don't just create another Usyk when Usyk retires. To a promoter, Usyk is like a bank that produces massive money. Again, it's a financial infrastructure. It's hard to convince someone to retire under those circumstances because it affects your pockets. If you're the team, hopefully Usyk has good people around him. Hopefully these people advise him from a moral position, not just an economic one. And decisions to carry on, they may not just be economic, because like I've stated previously, the more money you earn, the less it becomes about the money, the more it becomes about cultural impact, the more it becomes about purpose, motivations. Well, your motivations are different. Maybe there's more work to do. Maybe there are more chapters in the Usyk story. I think we can safely assume here, to conclude the previous question or the previous statement about the team, is that the issue is that the team has a conflict of interest. And conflicts of interest are always difficult. So what about the boxing purist perspective? First of all, there's not one type of boxing purists. There are different perspectives within the boxing purist. But I think generally speaking, boxing purists want to see great boxing fights. For example, speaking from my perspective, as I would like to consider myself a boxing fan, I would have loved to have seen Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe. That would have been epic. Lennox Lewis was a tremendous champion. Riddick Bowe was a tremendous champion. When he beat Evander Holyfield in the first fight, he was truly special. He was elite that night. Not many people would have beaten him. So Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe, and you had that juicy narrative, they fought in the Olympics, that would have been a sensational fight. And also Riddick Bowe versus Mike Tyson would have been brutal. Boxing purists want to see those type of fights. And then, of course, you've got the fancy matchups. And there's a variety of those. Marciano versus Ali, that would have been a great fight. Hagler versus Terence Crawford, that's an interesting one. Sonny Liston versus Joe Frazier, that would have been brutal. James Toney versus Andre Ward, that would have been brutal and technical at the same time. Evander Holyfield versus Rocky Marciano, that would have been a great fight. And the list goes on and on and on. I think from a British perspective, the boxing purist that is heavily keen to either being British or has a British interest wants to see the Moses Atama fight. But from a German boxing perspective, and from a boxing perspective, you want to see the Kabial fight. Preferably, you want to see both these fights. Also, I think people want to see the Rico rematch. For example, the purists want a more decisive victory, and understandably so. And then there's some really ambitious matchups, really ambitious, like the David Benavidez or the Bivol. Both are great fighters, by the way. But I think there's a stipulation here, and the stipulation is important. Boxing purists want to see an elite Usyk. They want to see an elite Usyk. They don't want to see an aging champion. A Usyk being beaten by father time. So a Usyk being beaten by father time and consequently battered into submission. That is not the goal for the boxing purist. The boxing purists, they generally, because I can only speak generally, they want the best versus the best. But they want Usyk to be at his best. In other words, you want a good, great Usyk fighting a great Moses Atama. Think of this. High boxing IQ beats elite boxers, but father time is undefeated. Respect father time, or it won't respect you. And I think that's a critical factor here. So what about the opponent's perspective on Usyk's retirement or on Usyk's future? Again, this is just speculation. Now, when you think of Usyk, it's a big pie in it. And everyone wants a slice of that Usyk pie. Because that pie has a lot of money and a lot of credentials. Like I said, it's a big pie with many slices. So when you talk about Moses Atama, of course he wants to fight Usyk. When you talk about Kabayel, of course he wants to fight Usyk. Everyone wants to fight Usyk because it's the cash cow and it's the chance for true greatness. And money and greatness, that means a lot to a boxer. When we talk about Moses Atama, that fight presents problems on both scales. In one sense, him being a southpaw, Moses Atama being a southpaw with elite timing, great accuracy, and this is a controversial statement, perhaps better feet, better footwork, that's a real big danger. Here's a perspective though, or here's a different perspective. If Moses does not get a win within 6 rounds or create substantial damage, he could lose really badly. And remember, Usyk is seasoned and not every loss is the same. And some losses, they can end your career. Moses does not have the experience. He does not have the experience to deal with Usyk. He doesn't. He hasn't been in the same jungles as Usyk. Yes, Moses Atama may be extraordinary. He may be extraordinary. He may be elite. But Usyk is an elite boxer with elite experience. And this fight, I think, would be a huge risk for Moses Atama. But from an opponent's perspective, they want parts of that pie. They want the money, they want the fame. And Usyk is that potential lottery ticket. So here's my perspective. And remember, this is just a subjective perspective. Nothing's objectively true here. I think, and I think many may have held this opinion, that Usyk should have retired. He should have retired after the Daniel Dubois rematch. Picture this. In front of 90,000 fans, he put on an impeccable performance against a good champion. And that victory looks even better now after the Fabio Wardley contest. From my perspective, from an outsider looking in, that would have been the fairy tale ending. Retiring on Mount Everest, from a figurative point of view, it was a special performance. It was phenomenal. And when you think about it, from there, he could have built his boxing academy, diverse his economic portfolio, help AJ retain the belts, go into politics, become a motivational speaker, raise his family, and just find a new purpose. To me, that was the perfect ending. But the second best time to retire could be a rematch with Rico. Think of this. A dominant victory removes the ambiguity. It removes the ambiguity and it restores faith within the hardcore boxing fan base. And that's important and that's essential. And that could be a good time to leave. Now, it's important to recognize that Usyk is not just a boxer. He is a huge part of boxing. Let's break it down into phases. Phase 1. Elite boxers generally have high or elite boxing IQs. Phase 2. Elite boxers generally have extraordinary courage. And finally, phase 3. Elite boxers respect but also excel in the science of boxing. And Usyk, he ticks all those boxes. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.